All right. Good morning to all, and welcome to our first seminar with the Saint Macrina Centre. It's titled The Authority of Our Gift of Life. So immediately we have senses of authority and gift, and also something about life in there. The text we're looking at is On the Soul and the Resurrection by Saint Gregory of Nyssa. And we are proceeding through 2 chapters each day. So we're taking it in pieces. We're not trying to encompass the whole immediately. We're going to do close reading, and we want to think closely too with Gregory and Macrina, which means we don't want to hasten. We don't want to hasten through things. And in this little seminar, we would do well to emulate Chaucer's Clark, who we read would gladly learn and gladly teach. That's the spirit in which we're gathering here, gladly learning and gladly teaching from each other. Now, as you will know from the preliminary material, we have chapters for each day, and then some themes given, and a couple of questions that are meant to be, as it were, background or global questions, which we will, with which we will begin at the proper time. But we don't need to remain there necessarily. No, we come to this, I believe, to hear a word from tradition, And like Macrina says on page 30, we need to find the proper starting point for our dialogue. She puts that question to Gregory, or puts that point to Gregory. It's our question too. First, we note, I think, that this work is cast as a personal dialogue, not a treatise. There's no will to it's thou in there. It's a personal dialogue. And so we're hearing a personal word, which means we want to be very careful how we approach the text. We want to consider the whole in terms of its integrity, rather than seek to extract or subtract or abstract, as it were, an idea or a line and have that stand in for our comprehension of the whole. Now, this means that the authority of the text that we're looking for, authority, a Greek word for authority is exousia, out of the essence of. So the authority of this text for us arises from within the essence of its saying, its phrasing, its ethos. We're not concerned so much with, say, dramatic definition. And there are dramatic definitions, there are dramatic things that one may pull from this work. We're more interested in the flow of meaningful relation. So not ideas that stand out, but how our ideas fit together, integrity. Now, the text is shaped around a visitation. But we need to realize that there's nothing, as it were, special here. What Macrina is saying, what Gregory is conveying to us, is in the tradition. It's in the tradition. And in the Orthodox tradition, there are plenty of flourishes, there's plenty of extravagance, but no extraordinary avenues or registers of meaning. There are no extraordinary avenues or registers of meaning. It's all open to all. And so even something like the phrase, the ecstasis of the saints, ecstasis of the saints, in this context doesn't mean standing out uniquely. Ecstasy is something like paroxysm. It means standing more firmly within, standing more deeply within the tradition. And so in a work like this, Macrina and Gregory are not, as it were, offering their own thoughts unique to them. They're giving phrase to currents within the tradition, currents of meaning within the tradition. So they're participating in the tradition. Now, if they're participating in the tradition and this meaning is lived in the tradition. Why the work? Why this? Why them? Why there? Well, Gregory comes in grief to his sister. He's uncertain of the fire of tradition. He's uncertain. It seems suddenly fragile. Seems suddenly fragile. The occasion of their meeting is the death of their mutual brother, Basil the Great, an immense figure in the tradition who loomed evidently. All right, so Gregory comes in grief, and he begins with the question. It's on page 28. We don't have to turn there, but it's on page 28. Gregory says, without vitality, what are we? Without that breath of life, what are we? Macrina doesn't go into the response very much immediately, but she does acknowledge that Gregory is holding together life and integrity as one. And that's good. So let's begin there. Our life is integral, we read, composite, and in movements. Our being is composite and in movement, which means it's subject to either integration or disintegration. Disintegration is what Gregory is concerned with. Integrity, then, is the question of wholeness and meaningful relation. Wholeness and meaningful relation, that's integrity. It's threatened when we become uncertain of a relation or its meaning. When we don't see how things relate meaningfully together, we can feel off. Now, Gregory is struggling with this immediately. So this is on page 30. I'm just going to read out a little bit. Gregory says, how can virtue have a place with those who suppose that the present life is the limit of their existence and who hope for nothing more after this life? How can virtue have a place with those who suppose that the present life is the limit of their existence and who hope for nothing more after this life? What's Gregory saying? He's saying, what does integrity or virtue mean if we're concerned about what happens after our movement ceases, after our breath ceases? Right? What does it mean when we're considering after our movement ceases? Another way of putting this question is, are our integrity, our virtues or excellences, is our flourishing in relation, our integrity, our excellences, our flourishing in relation, are these to be understood in terms of time and its impact on matter? That's the question. Macrina says, no, time is too narrow. Time cannot be defining for being. The whole of creation is defining. This is page 33, near the top. She says, I will tell you a word, indeed, not my own, nor from any other human being, for we are small, however great we may be. But that which the creation of the universe narrates through the wonders which are in it, which the eye hears when the wise and artful word sounds in the heart through what is seen. Creation, here's the point, creation openly proclaims its maker. The very heavens, as the prophet says, are telling the glory of God with silent voices. So our createdness, our being, is not confined to time. Our participation is rather in the whole of creation, which openly proclaims the glory of its maker. Why does this matter? Gregory is talking about loss here. He's talking about loss. That's what we're dealing with the perception of loss. Now, if we confine our sense of vital integrity to time, if we define our sense of vital integrity in terms of time, and then assume that the horizon of time, our temporal horizon, is our own mortality. If we assume both of those, make those steps, then our life, as Macrina says on page 32, is nothing but death. Our life is nothing but death. If we confine our sense of vital integrity, our being, to time, and then assume the horizon of time is our own mortality, then we are a being unto death. A being unto death, as it were. Being defined by death offers a horizon of is and is not. Being defined in terms of death offers the horizon of is and is not. This is a theme we're going to explore throughout. Is and is not. And yet, is and is not to be simply comprehended. On page 32, Macrina talks about those who look at the cosmos are dim-sighted with regard to the one who is revealed to us. So is and is not, or our sense of is and is not, is also a question of perception. Perception. If we misperceive the one revealed, if we think we grasp when we don't. So the one revealed, the Lord of all creation, is awesome, awesome, too sheer to allow either simple grasp or haste. One is patient and perhaps silent, even, as Macrina says many times, in drawing near to the one revealed. So, in this sense, then, how do we respond to the idea of loss or the experience of loss? We can, as it were, work in the categories of is and is not, and we will here in the seminar somewhat. The categories of is and is not might be called Euclidean. I'm reading Dostoevsky right now, Euclidean geometry. But is and is not also demonstrates the transparency of apperception, the transparency of our perception. And this, just a sideways note, this is on page 40, when Macrina talks about we are seeing through our sight. There's a composite being there, even in vision. That's one response, to think in terms of is and is not. And that's a very useful, very common way. Another response we might glean, and this is on page 43, just in that first full paragraph. Here, we read, in fact, however, none of these things is brought about automatically by the nature of the elements, but rather each is induced by art to accomplish the inventor's intention. And then here's the point. Art is a kind of steadfast thought operating through matter towards some purpose. And thought is a kind of motion, that's very important, and movement, motion and operation proper to the mind. So art is a kind of steadfast thought operating through matter towards some purpose, and thought is a kind of motion and operation proper to the mind. We see the integrity of being in motion here. Macrina is saying we can respond to uncertainty or a sense of loss by uniting our art and our thoughts, or our making and our being, or our creativity and our character into one integral personal whole. That is, the response to the divine gift is lived out. It becomes embodied in us, where our making or our art is no different than our being or our thinking. All right, so that's by way of opening remarks. Let's look at a couple of passages more closely before opening it up then. I just want to give a brief overview of the two chapters. The first chapter is, so please have your text ready now too. The first chapter is about survival. It's the question of life and its assumed or presumed horizon. Survival means life beyond whatever the sur is passing. So the first chapter is about the mystery of our form of life, the mystery of our form of life. The second chapter, which begins to circle around an idea of nature or physis. This is about the thusness of the soul or of our being. And we're told that it is integral and in relation. Two things we know, integral and in relation. All right, let's get our hands busy a little bit. Please turn to page 34, right? 34 at top of the page. And I'm going to read just to the end of the chapter and offer a few comments. And then we will read another passage or pair of passages a little bit later on, and I'll offer comments again, and then we'll open it up. All right, so we'll read, think a little bit, and then we'll open it up to dialogue. This is the top of page 34. Please read along in the text. The swift revolution of the celestial sphere, the reverse movement of the inner orbits, the occultations and conjunctions, and the harmonious oppositions of the stars. When we see all these with the intellectual eye of the soul, the noetic eye of the soul, are we not taught plainly from our observations that a divine power, appearing skillful and wise in the universe and permeating everything, fits the parts together with the whole and fulfills the whole in the parts? It, the deity, maintains everything by one power, remaining in itself and revolving around itself. It never ceases its motion nor migrates into another place than that in which it is. Very, very, very curious. So what do we hear immediately here? We have the undeniable significance of observation or appearance. So observation or appearance is not epistemologically suspect. That's first. Indeed, through appearance or through perception, we can glimpse the mystery of the divine integrity of all being. That's an amazing assertion. Also, this, especially the reference to the deity, is phrased in monadic terms, and as a monad, and it is described in terms of circular movements, circular and movements. So this is a figure of intimacy, drawing near and intimacy. All right, to continue. Skipping that little paragraph. She replied, "It is said by the wise that the human being is a kind of small cosmos, containing in himself the same elements with which the whole is built up. If this is true, and it seems likely, perhaps we would not need any other assistance to confirm for us what we have assumed concerning the soul. We have assumed that it exists in itself with its own nature, utterly different from the solidity of the body. As we observe the whole universe through sensual apprehension, and by the very operation of our senses, as we observe the whole universe through sensual apprehension, by the very operation of our senses, we are led to conceive of that reality and intelligence which surpasses, which surpasses the senses. Our eyes become interpreters of the omnipotent wisdom which is contemplated in the universe, the wisdom which reveals through itself the one who maintains the whole in accordance with it. In the same way, when we look at the cosmos in ourselves, we have found a good place to start conjecturing, to start drawing things together, to start conjecturing about what is hidden from what is appeared, from what appears. By hidden, I mean that which escapes the observation of the senses, because in itself it can be known only by the intellect and not by sight. So a few thoughts here. Macrina begins, it is said, and it is said that one seeks the divine integrity of all creation. It's a common inclination and movement in the tradition, common enough for her to say that. This passage also introduces the movement of surpassing, which lies close to our sense of apophasis. We also read that wisdom is revealed through appearance. So appearances are real. But then he has this, or they have this term hidden at the end, which is curious. We might think of hidden later. And this, of course, is a celebrated passage regarding the man as microcosm, as it's said. All right, let's look at two more passages before opening it up a little bit. Michael, could I ask you to read a little bit, please? This is from the bottom of page 44, and so in consequence of this, over to the end of that first paragraph on 46. So just the bottom of 44 and then all of 45, and then just to complete the paragraph on page 46, please.
The last paragraph. Oh, I see. Okay. And over on to the next full paragraph ending there.
End with the words, in some manner beyond human comprehension, at the top of 46. At the end of that paragraph.
Okay. And so in consequence of this, I said, from one absurdity we deduce another absurdity, for our discussion leads us to conclude that our mind is the same as the divine nature, if we know each by removing that which is found by sense perception. Don't say same, my teacher said. This is another impious argument. Say, as you were taught by the inspired voice, that the one is like the other. That which is made in the image of something else must keep in every respect a similarity to its archetype. The likeness of the intellectual is intellectual. The likeness of the bodiless is bodiless, freed from all weight and escaping all dimensional measurement, like its archetype, but different from it according to the particular property of its nature. For it would not be an image if it were the same as its original in all respects. But whatever appears in the uncreated nature, the same appears in the created nature. Often in a small fragment of glass, when it happens to lie in the sunlight, the whole circle of the sun is seen, not appearing in it according to its own size, but as the smallness of the fragment allows the reflection of the sun's circle. In the same way, the smallness of our nature reflects the images of those ineffable properties of divinity, so that our reasoning, guided by these properties, does not fail to comprehend the essence of the mind, because it dismisses the property of corporeality from its examination of the subject. Still, we do not consider the small and perishable nature equal to the invisible and immortal. We suppose that its essence is intelligible, since it is an image of an intelligible essence, yet we do not say that the image is the same as the archetype. Because of the ineffable wisdom of God which appears in the universe, we are confident that the divine nature and power is in everything that exists, so that everything remains in existence. Of course, one should ask about the principle of the nature. The essence of God is far distant from that which is revealed and understood in each created thing. Yet, we affirm that that which is different in nature is nevertheless found in these created things. In the same way, it is not at all incredible that the nature of the soul, which is something else in itself, whatever it is thought to be, can exist, even though those things which appear as elements in the cosmos differ from it in principle of their nature. After all, even in living bodies, as we have already said, which subsist from a mixture of the elements, the simplicity and invisibility of the soul and the solidity of the body have nothing in common according to the principle of their natures. Even so, we do not doubt that the life-giving energy of the soul is in these bodies, combined with them in some manner beyond human comprehension.
Thank you. Thank you. That's amazing. A couple of thoughts on here before we open it up to the questions. This is an immense passage as well. So at the top of 45, initially, Macrina resists Gregory's abstraction. She resists his abstraction by refusing identification. She says sameness is not okay. Right? It's a very subtle hermeneutic response. So she resists abstraction by refusing identification. That might be a formula. Also, we read here of the image as a bearer of truth. The image is a bearer of truth. The icon in Greek is a bearer of truth. And this brings us puts us in mind of Macrina's and Gregory's earlier dealings with appearance, where appearance is not denigrated. She also says, image is not the same as archetype. And this is because identification or identity means stillness, inertia, a lack of movement. We've also seen that not only the divine is understood as unceasing movement, a metaphor, but human life is unceasing movement as well. And so abstractions or identifications which pause movements are of depth. Now, regarding the second portion of that, we begin to have a sense, I think, of the distinction between what later becomes known as essence and energies in Palamas, notably in Palamas, but others as well. He's talking about the essence here. The essence is distant, far, far distant. He says, through participation in what appears, we become confident in the ineffable wisdom of God, which is amazing. It's the first phrase of the paragraph, partway down 45. Because of the ineffable wisdom of God, which appears, it's appearing, we are confident in the wisdom of God. Also here, we have a kind of horizon of knowing here. We have a slight paradox where God is, as it were, phrased, put as being distant. And yet there's a sense of withinness. So the deity is ultimately distant, as it were, removed, as not removed, but distant, and yet within all. So we have a little paradox there. And it's phrased in this passage, interestingly. She says, that which is different in nature is found in these created things. That which is different in nature, that's at the bottom of 45. Yet we affirm that that which is different in nature is nevertheless found in these created things. So this is an image, a bearer of truth, about synergy as well. This passage is about synergy of all of creation. All right, so some thoughts. Now let's begin to open this up. Let's walk into the text. Let's begin to talk. But we have two questions in mind. So let's remind ourselves of them and then open it up. The first question which we may pursue or may not as we feel, is why we ask with Macrina, why is our heart so filled with what she calls resentment towards death at the end of chapter 2? She asks Gregory that question, but I think we could ask ourselves too. In other words, why do we feel so strongly, even deliberately, about this aspect of existence? People make their stance towards death their identity. It's very strange. So that's the first question. The second question is, how does Gregory's vision, Gregory and Macrina's, they're of the tradition, but how does Gregory's vision of the integrity of all creation inwardly form our sense of encounter? What does encounter mean if the meaningful relation is integral already? How does his sense, her sense of integrity inform our attentiveness to the present moment, now even, or how we consider the future and the past? What does integrity have to do with time? So that's another avenue, question that we could open up. But let's begin thinking together, referring back to these passages or elsewhere in the chapters as we see fit, and walking in the spirit of these questions.
I'm going to push back a little bit on the first question, if I may, Andrew, which Macrina asks. Why, we ask with Macrina, is our heart so filled with resentment towards death? At Vespers on Saturday, we had at the end of the Vespers a short prayer, Panahida, for Fernanda. The family had come here from Mexico some years ago because the father had been kidnapped in Mexico and held for ransom, something that occurs occasionally in Mexico. So they'd been here and part of the church for a decade or so. And then Fernanda, who was, I think, 14, was able to go back to Mexico City to be with her grandparents and her aunts and cousins and what have you. So this was the anniversary, the 10th anniversary of how they were together in a car, she and a cousin and an aunt. And they were in a horrific traffic accident and they died. So some people would say that, if you're over 70 and you die, it's not, it's a source of grief and pain, but it's not a tragedy. But if you're 13, there's something quite difficult to free yourself from, just how awful that is. And as you know, when we do this in our services, we chant together, pray together, and then we greet those that still walk the earth. Some people have words, others have nothing. We can say memory eternal, which is a lovely thing to say, but it's dangerous to say it too quickly, because for this mother and this father on Saturday night, it is a grief that's unmeasurable. It is a pain that is unmeasurable. So why, we ask with Macrina, is our heart so filled with resentment towards death? I have no idea about the parents. I know that for me, I mean, I knew Fernanda a little bit. She was a beautiful young girl, full of life. I don't feel resentment. I feel a great, great sadness. And then when I think of my own sort of being addressed by this, my own parents dying, being with them, I never felt resentment over it. I felt how awful it was, how full of awe it was, how demanding it was. With Gregory coming to his sister shortly after his brother has died, and his brother was not easy. He was not easy. He was a tough guy. Tough to have him as a brother. As Gregory Nazianzen knew, maybe even tougher to have him as a friend. And then to discover, he's coming because of that. And then to discover that his sister is also coming up to the edge of the eternal. She senses that he has resentment. And I think that's not uncommon. It's not uncommon for there to be resentment. In fact, I expect it's probably the most common response to the departure of somebody you know and care about, or to your own departure, or to the fact that you are facing dying. So one of the things that's so interesting to me about this, and you began with it by speaking about how we were in this seeking to hear a word from tradition. One of the things that I was really struck by as I was reading it again this morning was, and this is, I think it's important, that the work, and even in these 2 chapters, the tradition that is invoked here, not necessarily identified, but is called forth, is all that thinking about the shadow of death, which is part of what these 2 remarkable people had received in their formation through their life. Plato, Anaximander, Euripides, Epicurus, the Stoics, Empedocles, Anaximander, the Delphic Oracle. So one of the things that maybe this is just me, but one of the things that I found so touching by it in this family, where they've been so deeply shaped, they've inherited this rich tradition with all of its curiosity and all of its ambiguity and all of its, I could even say, its internal contradictions. She begins talking with her brother. Maybe one thinks of it as she's trying to build a case or something, but my sense is that it's a kind of invocation of all of this. It's a calling into mind that we sit in this world in which there's these ways of trying to struggle with this matter. And you, Gregory, have come down in part of this. You've come down in that part of it which is resentful. So all I wanted to say was that I think there's a tone here. And I wonder if we try to think of if this tone is in fact a kind of pastoral tone, pulling these things forward, saying, yeah, this way, this way, this way. And the Psalms and Ecclesiastes and the Apostle Paul. And if in fact that isn't refreshing, if she isn't seeking to refresh Gregory's understanding of the kind of landscape of struggle that we inherit around how to think of these things. So that's something that occurs to me. And I mentioned Fernanda and these matters because I think there's a little danger in this book of, and in how we see her tone, a little bit of a danger of becoming dismissive of the grief and the pain that's associated with this. I don't think that's what she's intending to do at all. But I think that's for those that want abstract notions about the soul and notions about immortality and turn them into concepts to insulate themselves from the reality of finitude. One can do that with this text, and some have.
I wouldn't mind jumping in just quickly just to reinforce something David said by way of a contrast that possibly gets lost, but I think has a kind of resonance in the Hebraic tradition, but a contrast in the Greek tradition that sort of more or less gets obliterated by the philosophical tradition. Certainly when it, through Epicurean and Stoical thought, and thought of someone like Epictetus and above all Plato, because I think there is a risk, this a large part of this dialogue could be seen as a kind of gloss on Plato's Phaedo, which addresses similar concerns and takes a very confident stance about the afterlife and how obvious it is that the soul, which is immaterial and like the rest of nature, is bound to exist eternally. And this can be rather facile in the context contrasting context that I was alluding to, namely, and came to mind when David was recounting the recent service, namely Euripides, who Nietzsche, I think, kind of wrongly assigns to a kind of, walking away from the kind of mythic tragic tradition, but in some of his plays, when he evokes a concept of human beings as walking corpses, and it's just sheer awe at the face of death. That's a contrast that makes the subsequent philosophical tradition seem kind of meager in a way. So I think David is right. If it's not invested with something else, then I think we are kind of in an all too kind of easy moment. And I'll just finish by throwing out this, because it might be a little kind of key. I think if we keep in mind the metaphysical significance of the incarnation, and more broadly, not just in the singular sense, but more broadly, the notion that the logos also informs our horizons, that our horizons aren't simply defined by our mortality. We could simultaneously keep in mind the notion that, Andrew started with, that our horizons, if they're limited to our mortality, do have us walking towards death, as walking corpses, let's say, as Euripides would say. And if we don't, and I think that's a danger, which isn't satisfyingly countered by the notion, well, there's the material and then there's the immaterial, and these are diametrically opposed. That isn't actually what I think the Orthodox or any Christian tradition affirms, even though it's exploiting this tradition. I think it also counters the tradition with just to reiterate the point, the idea of logos becoming flesh. So that might be something to keep in the forefront of our mind as we read these, as we encounter this argument unfolding dialectically.
I would like to say a few words. It is very clear that Saint Gregory, in this dialogue, he's trying to offer an alternative, a Christian alternative, maybe pastoral, as Mr. David said, to the question, what is death? And we have different philosophical perspective, and what happens with the soul after death, if there is a soul. What is happening, and we know from Plato that in Plato philosophy there is the reincarnation, metempsychosis, the reincarnation of the soul in another body. And despite the fact that Christians have a very let's say, bright perspective on death based on Christ's sacrifice, and we know from St. Paul that we will see after that God, we'll see God face to face, isn't it? This is, we will see more openly the divine mysteries, and we'll share in God's life. Of course, the people who lived in faith. There is something very troubling and very we have not to hurry on too much, as David said, with eternal memory, because what is so troubling from a Christian perspective in Saint Gregory's work is the fact that, despite the fact that human being is a microcosmos, and despite the fact that he or she is the image of the archetype of God, the image of and likeness of God, despite the fact that God's providence encompasses all creation, all things, we still are mortal beings. So I think this is the most troubling question. How is this possible? And I don't know if we can offer quickly a very easy response based on how actually Saint Gregory and Macrina suggested, based on the episode of the fall of Adam and Eve from paradise. In every concrete grief and death, we cannot accept somehow that is a consequence of the Adam and Eve fall from the paradise. So this is what I think why the death from a Christian perspective is becoming the enemy. How is it possible, despite the fact that we are created in God's image, microcosmos, providence, there is such a phenomenon which is inexplicably, I think, to the end. Yeah, so a mystery and questions.
David, you're
If I can just pick up on that a little bit, Florin. On death as the enemy. And I don't want to get ahead of the text because I think the text needs to unfold in its own way. The death that is the enemy, if I understand this at all, is a way of saying that if you understand that which you are in the presence of, if you understand it in a way solely as it appears to you through the prism of whatever your preoccupations and assumptions are, in that very act, you step out of life, because the dynamism of life, that which is coming to, is that which is arising between you, which is the playground of the Holy Spirit, is something you're not willing to see, you're not open to. So one of my little ways of thinking about this is that the opposite of being attentive and present to what is real is presumption, is that you make something out of it even before it's unfolded, often. And in these first two chapters, we're getting Saint Macrina's cultivating, reminding us, inviting us again to consider the wonder of it all, the sheer wonder of it all. In a sense, the mystery isn't death, the mystery is life, the wonder of it all. But that we only that requires a particular kind of stance in order to simply be present and open to it. And one of the great human struggles, because I suppose, and it's behind her question, because we resent that our understanding, that our being, that we resent the fact that the way we see the world, what we see as a treasure in the world, we resent the fact that that gets taken from us, that disappears. And so then the invitation is, maybe you're looking at the wrong thing. This question of perception that Andrew raised, that our perception, what is shaping or what has captured our attention. And Michael's reminder, of course, that the incarnation, the revelation of the incarnation is the revelation. It unveils the mystery. But the mystery is there in all creation. It's the Logos, which the Logoi, which is present in all that is. And when we are alert to that, or at least a little bit alert to it, perhaps, there isn't resentment, but there still is grief. So for me, the sort of great biblical text about this is the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus Christ takes his friends across the river Creton and says to them, sit here, sit here. This isn't your battle. It's mine. But please, please, don't go to sleep. Be awake. Be attentive. Just be present. Let me work it through. Let me enter the struggle and be in solidarity with me. There's no resentment there. But there's a lot of grief.
And no conclusions either. Just to follow your point, David, it's really, really well done. There's no conclusion. Even our Lord, as the narrative relates to us, in his humanity, underwent the process of death, went through it.
And
let's stay here for a minute, just pursuing David's point and return to the text a little bit. So part of in what I hear you saying, David, is that Macrina is gently parrying, as it were, Gregory's attempts to pin down something, to pin it down, and look for certainty, a certainty of response, a conclusion about death, or some way of identifying it, stilling it into something that he feels comfortable with. On page 34 over to page 35, the section in which Gregory, talks about the human being as a microcosm. Let's turn there for a moment, because I think there's a clue here which may help us. And it's towards the end when he says,
give us the page again, sorry.
Page 34 and 35, just the end of chapter 1. When Maximus talks about what is, as it were, clarified, the clearing, truth as clearing, but also truth as withholding or hiddenness almost. So he uses the phrase hidden, or the term hidden here. And it strikes me that that might be a way that Macrina is saying, be careful of your immediate response, because the mystery is not plainly set forth. We have to live through this mystery, and as was said, without concluding, and with other people too. It's not us alone. We're not completing our own meaning, which is what we tend to do when we're looking for certainty or conclusions. Yeah, but we might. What? So how are we figuring this word hidden or plain here towards the end of chapter 1? What's Macrina teaching us by that contrast? Because it's not, as it were, as we heard at the beginning, there's nothing extraordinary in our tradition unavailable to a normal person. It's all ordinary. It's all in common. It's all present to us. So what's she saying?
By the way, Andrew, do you happen to know if the Greek word for hidden would be related to our word crypt or kryptos?
I believe it would be. I don't know because I don't have the Greek text, but I'm almost certain. So let's proceed with that. That's often what it is.
Florin may know.
This of the hidden, yeah. I think it's the intelligible realm, the Platonic realm, as Michael suggested. What is behind the appearance, what we can know from the senses, and there is a higher spiritual reality, so which is hidden and is waiting there for us to be discovered. But a little bit for myself, although I'm an Easterner, not only the language, but as well the spirit of the dialogue seems quite immersed in the Platonic way of thinking. For myself, so the intelligible cosmos, the cosmos of ideas, of divine ideas, it's hidden for us, but using this ladder of the visible world, we can step by step to climb it and to reach what is invisible, the realm of angels, of God, of the Trinity. This is the suggestion for me with the hidden.
Well, can I make another suggestion? I mean, and of course I have no idea, but she could be using hidden here simply as a way of saying, I see what you see. I see where you're coming from. I see what you're focusing on. But beware. Beware. There's more unfolding. There's more there. So in that sense, hidden is simply a way of cautioning and alerting one to the fact that well, I think I'll say this: the fact that when we see something as something, when we reduce it to what seems obvious, and when our passions are involved, particularly when it comes to dying, and to somebody we have a deep relationship with, this is enormous. It's an enormous difficulty. So I wonder if there's certainly the echoes of the Platonic world in this, as you pointed out, Florin. But I wonder if the spiritual prodding in it doesn't have something to do with just cautioning him and trying to help him as Jesus Christ did when he crossed the river Kidron and said to his disciples, don't make something out of this. Don't presume about it, but stay awake. Seek to be present. Something's unfolding. Something's unfolding. And we don't know what it is. In many cases, we can't know. But it's unfolding. So some attentiveness. And it leads me back to this thing of resentment again. And this is, I guess, more something that seems so apparent to me, having lived a bit too long. I have. I've been around death a fair bit. And it is so striking to me how when somebody is dying or when they have died, that resentment becomes the center of so many people's preoccupation in mind. And it seems to me that resentment is the opposite of grief. Resentment is a mask to cover up your grief, or it's even an exit from your grief. So it is in that sense, it's a passion in a way that grief, I don't think, is a passion in the same way. So resentment indicates some kind of suffering, obviously. But when faced with the mystery of dying, as Gregory is here, and they ring the changes on all these various philosophical and religious ways of trying to make sense of it, trying to do something with it, trying to colonize it, trying to humanize it, trying to limit it. From a kind of pastoral perspective, it seems to me anyways, the challenge is how to help people let the grief be, let it come, let the tears come, let the mystery come, and how to sit with them there. But maybe I'm reading too much onto it.
And maybe it is not resentment, but simply fear
Yeah,
towards that.
Sure.
So
yeah. Sorry, Andrew, did I carry it away someplace else? You can bring us back.
No, I'm with you. And I think that's, I mean, you speaking of tonality earlier, I think that's one of the most important questions that we're facing that you brought up beautifully for us. It is interesting that the qualification pastoral was used, because by using that term, I'm suspecting that you're cautioning us against what might be the assumed form of theology, which then would be non-pastoral. This is a personal word from a great struggler to another between great strugglers in our tradition.
And she raised him.
And she raised him. The personal here is not different than the traditional, as it were. It would be strange to speak of theology in any other way but the tonality which we find here. And we do that all the time too with each other. If someone comes to us or we go to someone indeed, uncertain or in grief or at a loss, as Gregory is here, it would be inhuman to start reciting texts at them and say, put this in your mind and, see you. The moment of presence, of encounter, of loving encounter, which is all that we're taught in our tradition, is the rest of it is to bring us to that point, to bring us to that openness, that presence, that love, without presumption. And here it doesn't seem like the personal is different than the traditional. Theological, another way of putting it is that if we start thinking of theology as distinct from applied theology, we start thinking this is theology in action, and this is theology in the abstract, then we forget what Michael reminded us of earlier. The singular gift apparent here is the Logos made flesh. This is why it is not of the same spirit as a Platonic dialogue, although some of the terms are the same. But the Logos become flesh, meaning become incarnate between us, each other. That seems to be part of what you're saying too, with this idea of tonality.
So just a short remark. The powerful Platonic style of the dialogue makes me think that the flesh is becoming logos. I had this impression while reading the dialogue and having my own inner debate with Saint Gregory, although of course his personal response and Macrina's is in the same time a traditional response. And I think this dialogue was intended to be the summary of the church opinion on death, the destiny of the soul after the death, a little bit the immortality of the soul. I mean, the fact that there is a resurrection and so on. But it is very, very difficult to, I think, to reconcile the biblical teaching and especially the Old Testament, where we had no a very well developed teaching about the immortality of the soul, or what's happening with the soul after the death, and a very clear stress on the unity of body and soul, with the tonality of the dialogue, in which the soul is something like an essence, very clear, separated by the body, and with a destiny which I don't know, with a destiny. There are almost two substances: the body and the feelings and the five senses and the soul. So I had this impression that it is a very Platonic work, although of course you have there the embodiment and when the soul is giving in the same moment with the body and so on. So it is the unity affirmed in a very Christian way, but in the same time, in a very Platonic manner, the soul is very distinct from the body, which in the Bible we have not. They are a whole being. I am soul, I am a body in the same time. Very difficult, and this doesn't imply that there is not a existence after the death of the body, but we can see the danger of stressing too much the spiritual realm, and and we forget our material existence, the fact that we grow in a body, and we are not that dichotomist as we think we should be. So we forget the body somehow, and Saint Gregory is forgetting it.
I really appreciate, Florin, that you put an accent on this, because I think we need to carry this through the whole of the work and continue to think about how is this at play here? Because that Platonic world, and many people in our world, of course, live in that world. I mean, this is a ubiquitous notion, which the great Plato articulated so much clearer than most people. But it is, I think it's part of natural religion to think of things that way. And so it's not surprising that it would be here. So the Hebraic world, the Greek world, gives us these things to struggle with. So I would just like to add a question for us to keep in mind in light of what you've raised, and hope that we can pull that through the next 4 days as we consider this text. And my, let me think, how can I phrase, I'll phrase it just simply. So in the end here in this text, is the soul something? Like, is it something? Or is the soul, is this a way of speaking about a particular kind of presence, I would even say moment, is it is it well, I'll just leave it at that. Well, let me just, I thought of it this morning before we began as well. Is the soul an element? Is it a way of speaking about the ever-moving repose of the gift of presence, not defined by passions? Is it a way of speaking about what is life-giving and drawn forth by the fire of the Spirit? Is it a way of talking about how communion, wherever we encounter it, refines us, helps us let go of some of the dross? And then, and is it saying that that kind of refinement, that kind of presence is part of what we call the great cloud of witnesses? It's part of the whole tradition of those that we say their lives were in the end filled with grace, and they surround us with the eternal presence of communion. So, is the soul an element? I mean, just to say, not to, I don't want you to necessarily answer this, but in this work, is the soul in the end something, or is it an element? Or is it a way of speaking about that which is closer to us than our breath, but which in a way we're invited to, we participate in, we enter into communion with. And it is always life-giving. But it's a way of speaking about communion with God now and unfolding. Now and unfolding. I think I've said this to you, Florin, before, but I've always thought that the great Christian question is not, is there life after death? The Christian question is there life before death?
For death.
Yeah. So this matter of the soul and how they're working with it. So I really appreciate you accenting the Hebraic Greek tension here. But I also wonder, as we move through this, in the end, are they really telling us the soul is something?
I have this feeling, yes.
Yeah. So.
And we forget that the soul is not the human being. Yeah. It's incomplete and it's a tragedy. Actually, that is an accident. We are not complete. We cannot go on, fly, and be happy, and we'll take back our bodies at the resurrection. I don't think so. I think Father Lazar Puhalos has something to say about this topic against Rose, Seraphim Rose, who,
yeah,
with his bright vision of death.
Kirti, you have been musing. I would love to hear your muses.
Thank you. Yes, I've been musing a lot. I think it's fantastic, just what you've all been sharing. Yeah, especially that conversation about the Hebraic and the Greek and where this text lies and the dialectic therein. I was revisiting, unfortunately I don't have the book version. I didn't equip myself properly with that, but I've been looking at the Kindle version. And so unfortunately I'm not sure the actual page number, but you'll probably be able to find it. Going back to our question there, there's a section which says, what cause for melancholy then is here therein, that the visible is exchanged for the invisible, and wherefore is it that your mind has conceived such a hatred of death? So that's kind of the question there. And then Gregory saying, upon this, I recurred to the definition which he had previously given of the soul, and I said that to my thinking her definition had not indicated distinctly enough all the powers of the soul, which are a matter of observation. It declares the soul to be an intellectual essence which imparts to the organic body a force of life by which the senses operate. And it continues. And I found that very fascinating, especially because it seems in that sort of definition that the soul becomes a bit of a hinge. So it's not a black and white soul distinct from body. So again, it says it declares the soul to be an intellectual essence which imparts to the organic body a force of life by which the senses operate. And so I find that very interesting to kind of chew on. So that's getting me musing there. But I specifically like that idea that that impartation to the organic body of force of life. There's definitely that resounding upon the idea that our mortal body takes on this sort of life and it's moving in its breath. And that certainly resonates with the idea of death being a fixity, whereas life being in motion, and therefore the soul being a very integral element, huge integral element of enabling that vivification to continue and to flourish. And so I'm trying to, it's got me thinking of lots of things there. Yes, especially in terms of like, what does that force of life look like? And it connects a little bit with some of the work that I've been doing in terms of like 20th century philosophical theologians, and particularly because of the touchback to the idea of hiddenness and the apophatic that got brought up earlier. Because an example would be Michel Henry, which I know David and I have chatted a little bit about, and I won't digress too far because that's certainly not the topic of the current conversation. But for him, he doesn't use soul as much as he has this concept of the flesh, wherein the life of God auto impresses like life, and it entirely constitutes our being. And it's like we have a life imparted that then we essentially like live out. And that's in that hidden place, an unseen place. And so it's an interior apophatic, which really connects back to something that I think Andrew and David, you were talking about earlier, to do with this paradox of God being once distant, but incredibly intimate and close to. So anyways, I think to bring that to a bit of a culmination there, I find that passage in the book there about soul imparting to the organic body a force of life incredibly interesting. It seems to me that it frustrates a very clear distinction between seen and unseen, between body and soul. And the soul then becomes an integral force in imparting this moving, breathing life of God to the human person that frustrates death also. So that's some of the stuff that I've been musing on. Yeah, any thoughts? Sorry, I dropped a lot there. Go for it.
Excellent. You've been more pastoral than me, which I'm a priest, or than the rest of the participants. Yeah, very good summary of Saint Gregory, and good emphasis. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm really intrigued to see how this conversation, especially like you're saying, between the Hebraic and the Greek, is set to develop like throughout the text, and like David was saying as well, see how these kind of themes unravel and continue to play against each other. And I find that really fascinating.
You stressed the unity of body and soul, but what I saw, and it's minor, let's say, is not that visible. It's the stress on the distinctive character of the soul, the essence, the intellectual essence. So this is what is somehow troubling for me, but I don't know how to put it in another way. So still they are our contemporaries in explaining the doctrine of the how it's the soul related to the body. So they are our contemporaries for sure. And although they use the Platonic language, if you think of the definition of God as the highest good, towards whom all the souls are intention to reach the highest good, and the topic in itself is Platonic, and yeah, so we can see, at least in language, the Platonic style, but I think some ideas are as well Platonic. Anyhow, we will need a very comprehensive commentary from a biblical perspective, which we are not scholars, biblical scholars, philosophical scholars, and I like to see from the history of science a perspective, because I was amazed to discover there that in antiquity they knew that the moon, for example, had no its own brightness shining from it, but receiving the light from the sun. So it is something in antiquity, and other things from the history of science, very interesting there. So I would like to have this at least triple perspective, philosophical from history of science and biblical, to comprehend better what maybe I misjudged in Saint Gregory.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And just for response there really quickly, there certainly is like a section that I was reading this morning, and I was like, oh, that is quite like Neoplatonic, where it's talking about participation and that sort of thing. So I definitely see that there is that tension there. And in a way, that section kind of plays off against the bit that I was reading just a few minutes ago there as well. So there definitely seems to be that tension at the beginning, which is probably part of that, pastoral back and forth and shaping within this conversation where Gregory and Macrina are going as they're in this dialogue. And this is a dialogue that's going somewhere. So yeah, I'm very intrigued for the rest of that. So thank you for, again, accenting that tension there.
Thank you. And very modern. If you remember from apologetical perspective, when an atheist asks you to prove that there is God in creation, you ask him to prove that there is no God in creation, to prove the absence of God in creation. So in the same style, Saint Macrina asked the philosophers who denied the existence of the soul to prove that a human being has not a soul. So very modern apologetic, I would say as well.
I want to return to something that David Lewis said a little bit ago. Your question, David, is the soul something? Something. It's beautifully put. Beautifully put. And you followed it with really luminous thinking. I mean, no, but why not? That's what we're going to explore for the rest of the time. And the way that you phrased the soul, I mean, I noted down only a couple of them. They were luminous, like I said. But the soul as a form of communion, which in all ways refines us, and also the soul, in the sense of the notion that the soul is communion with God now and to be unfolded. You said more, but those two were what I managed to note down. This is really beautiful, because what you're doing is you're phrasing, seems to me, out of the tradition, a distinct way of trying to comprehend what we're facing, which is not repeating along Jewish lines of thought or Greek lines of thought or scientific or philosophical. It knows them, right? Macrina knows them, so does Gregory, but they don't need to stand on them. They're not a scaffold for them. And one thing that, Maximus, the Confessor, in one of his works says, we will distinguish only in thought what is undistinguishable in reality. It strikes me that Gregory is doing very much the same thing here. The distinctions he's making are not meant to be final, right? The soul is not a thing over against the body as a thing. And one of the reasons why we skirted each attempted definition so far in the text is every time we read a sentence which is meant to define the soul, it doesn't work well. We become caught up in thinking about essence, or we forget that intelligible means noetic, which is joined with the aesthetic. It's not different, you know. These definitions are hazardous. At the very beginning, we said we want to read the text in terms of its integral whole, not just extract definitions of the soul or of apokatastasis or any of these terms which, in our excitement, we might wish to take and use to inflame our own mind, but we take them unwisely. The question of the integrity of the person here is phrased as a question of integrity. That's how it's phrased in the text. So we're talking about a whole. Whenever we begin to try to seek a certain definition of an element, as you said, David, we're starting to think in terms of elements and parts, and we've taken a wrong step epistemologically. So this is just to circle back to how grateful or lovely it is to hear the soul being phrased as you just did, in a way which doesn't presume, in a way which is not looking for certainty or something that we can hold on to and then use in conversation with someone else. No, it's the fulfillment of the integral being of us that we're talking about. Anyways, I wanted to return to, and I don't know if you wanted to follow up your earlier musings, David, but that was really, really important. And I think that you have opened ways for us to keep not concluding, keep resisting the urge to be certain about this or that. But pardon me, I wanted to hand it back to you in appreciation. I mean, that was really, really well put before. Do you want to follow that up in light of what Florian and Kyria have been saying and the rest of the dialogue? Or was that just a thought that you offered and we'll return to it in time?
Oh, no, I don't have anything. I mean, I just, because of Florian's reminder of this long-standing tension within the Christian tradition, its gift and its tensions are Hebraic and Greek, and trying to find ways of saying Hebrew things in Greek and then in all of our other languages. And my sense that this is really important to pull this through our reading over this week, and simply the question of what, not to put too fine a point on it, but to speak a little Greek, what the hell is the soul? And what is resurrection? What is it? Is it something? Are they something? Or is this inviting us to think somewhat differently about that? So I just would wanted, at least for myself, to keep that in the front of my mind as we move through the week.
Dave, I just want to say that as you read the dialogue, when some delicate questions are raised, Macrina answers, this is the tradition. We don't need to think too much about it.
Yeah.
But what we know from the Bible, and she quotes. So it is this methodology followed, but interesting enough, and here I will need a Thomist scholar, is the fact that this thesis, antithesis, and answer, it's kind of a scholastic way of engaging with the questions, rising questions and delicate questions, against the idea, and Macrina answering and trying to prove that those ideas are wrong. So this is, I think, what Thomas of Aquinas did 1000 years afterwards.
Later.
The whole scholastic movement, this style of affirming a thesis, antithesis, and the answer, which again was quite a great discovery in theology.
And
But-
Aquinas, I mean, Aquinas is such a great thinker, and he, of course, was bringing Aristotle into the conversation in a thorough way. I mean, well, some of that obvious rhetorical approach is there. I think we have to just bear in mind that this is also a very intimate conversation between the elder sister and the younger brother about his older brother, who was a bit of a pain in the ass, and a brilliant man and a wonderful saint as well. But also that, I mean, he was difficult for Gregory. And so there is stuff that kicks around in your mind and struggles that kick around in your mind. So in a sense, all of what you said, I think, Florian, is the case. But it is also the case that this is in a sense, I mean, oddly enough, about things that we often think is sort of dogmatic and sometimes abstract, the soul and resurrection, is also very intimate text coming to us from that period and from a woman who had such an impact on her family's life and such an impact on the Christian tradition. So I think, you know, all of that's at play.
This is a great document, if you want. I think because nowadays Orthodox theology tends to despise scholastic medieval Catholic theology, while the style of this dialogue is I think it's in the way the scholastics 1000 years afterwards started thinking theology. So I think it's a false assumption, patristics against later scholastics and so on. So from an Orthodox perspective, yeah. I am saying this.
I think that's very interesting. And, you know, I used this text in a course I taught at Newman last year with 27 students, about 17 of them from the seminary. And all of them had read Aquinas, some of them more deeply than others. And one of the things that was apparent in that little month that we spent with this text was the habit of mind of the lovely students from the seminary, and they were terrific, very, very fine students. I couldn't have asked for them to be any better. But they also wanted to turn this into a scholastic document. So this is from the other side of that whole matter. And my point with them was, I see that, I see what you're saying there, but remember, this is a brother and a sister, and they're talking about their brother who's died, who was enormously significant, but he's died. And not only that, he comes in grief to his sister about their brother who died and discovers that she is dying. So I would say that, yes, all that's there, but let's remember, this is a conversation in the depth of an existential moment. So what we might see as abstractions also have a real existential edge on them, and are associated with what you know, Florin, so much better than I, that Orthodox theology, its long suit is a theology about the spiritual life and about the spiritual struggle.
Let's hope it's not only a literary device, the dialogue in that frame.
Well, I understand all that, but you know, I don't have much time for it.
Speaking of time, let's
Yeah.
draw to a close here. Thank you all very much. I'm going to pause the recording.